The story of Frances Farmer is one of the most unsettling and tragic stories in Hollywood history. For decades, many people believed they already knew what happened to her. She was a talented actress who rose quickly in the 1930s, argued with powerful studio bosses, struggled with alcohol, and eventually disappeared into a mental institution. That version of the story seemed simple. However, the truth was far more complicated and disturbing. Newly discussed hospital records, court documents, and personal writings reveal a life filled with conflict, independence, and punishment in a system that often treated patients harshly. Frances Farmer became famous at a time when Hollywood demanded strict obedience from its stars. Studios controlled the public image, the personal lives, and even the opinions of actors under contract. Farmer was different from many of her peers. She was outspoken, intelligent, and unwilling to behave exactly as the studio expected. From the beginning, she questioned authority and resisted attempts to shape her personality for publicity. This attitude made her stand out, but it also created powerful enemies in an industry that valued control above all else. When her career began to decline and her behavior became unpredictable, those in power had little patience for her independence. Eventually, the legal system and medical institutions stepped in, and her life changed forever. What happened after that became one of the darkest chapters in Hollywood history. For many years, rumors circulated about the treatment she received in hospitals and asylums. Some stories were exaggerated while others turned out to be painfully real. The records from those years describe a system that was overcrowded, poorly supervised, and often brutal. Patients were subjected to treatments that today would be considered dangerous or abusive. These documents help explain why the story of Frances Farmer continues to fascinate people decades after her death. Her life raises difficult questions about fame, mental health, and the power structures that shaped the entertainment industry during the early 20th century. Frances Farmer was born in Seattle, Washington, on September 19, 1913. Her childhood was not peaceful, and the tension inside her home shaped her personality from an early age. Her father, Ernest Farmer, was a lawyer who struggled to build a stable career. Her mother, Lillian Farmer, was ambitious and determined to create a different life for herself and her children. Their marriage was troubled, and arguments were common in the household. Eventually, the couple separated, which created instability for the children. Frances and her siblings moved several times while their parents tried to find new directions for their lives. This constant movement made it difficult for Frances to feel secure. Even as a child, she became independent and strong-willed. She learned that adults could not always be trusted to provide stability. Despite the difficulties at home, she showed remarkable intelligence and creativity at school. Teachers noticed her talent for writing and speaking, and she often expressed strong opinions about society and religion. One of the most famous moments of her early life came when she wrote an essay titled "God Dies" for a national student contest. In the essay, she questioned religious ideas and argued that people often ignored real suffering while focusing on small personal prayers. The essay won first prize and brought her a cash award, but the reaction from the public was intense and angry. Newspapers reported the story widely, and many religious leaders criticized the young student for challenging traditional beliefs. Instead of apologizing, Frances defended her ideas and refused to change her views. This early controversy showed the kind of person she would become. She was willing to stand alone if she believed she was right. The experience also taught her that speaking honestly could bring both attention and hostility. That lesson stayed with her as she grew older and began to think seriously about a career in acting. During her time at the University of Washington, Frances Farmer became deeply involved in theater. Acting gave her a sense of purpose and excitement that she had not felt elsewhere. On stage, she displayed a powerful presence and emotional intensity that impressed audiences and critics. Her teachers believed she had the potential to become a major performer, and she began to imagine a professional future in the theater. Around this time, she also entered another controversy that followed her for many years. In the mid-1930s, she won a newspaper contest that offered a trip to the Soviet Union. The trip was meant to encourage cultural exchange, but in the political climate of the time, Visiting the Soviet Union created suspicion in the United States. Many Americans viewed the country as a dangerous ideological rival. Frances accepted the prize and traveled across Europe before arriving in Moscow during the May Day celebrations. While there, she visited theaters, factories, and cultural institutions organized by the Soviet government. She later described the experience as educational but also complicated. She noticed poverty and hardship in many places and did not hide her observations. When she returned home, the trip made her appear politically controversial. Some people suspected she had sympathies with left-wing ideas, even though her main interest had always been theater. This reputation would later affect how people in Hollywood viewed her. Soon after turning to the United States, her acting ability attracted the attention of film studios. Hollywood was expanding rapidly during the 1930s, and studios were searching for new talent. Frances Farmer signed a contract with Paramount Pictures and moved to Los Angeles. Her early films showed promise, and audiences responded well to her performances. She appeared alongside well-known actors and quickly gained recognition. Yet the relationship between the young actress and the studio system soon became difficult. Paramount expected its stars to attend parties, follow publicity rules, and maintain carefully controlled public images. Frances disliked these expectations. She preferred a quieter lifestyle and often ignored studio instructions about how she should behave in public. As her film career continued, the tension between Frances Farmer and the Hollywood system grew stronger. She appeared in several films during the late 1930s, including productions that received good reviews and attracted audiences. Her performance in the movie Come and Get It demonstrated her dramatic talent and ability to portray complex characters. Critics praised her intensity and natural presence on screen. However, studio executives were less enthusiastic about her personality behind the scenes. She frequently argued about scripts, challenged directors, and refused to follow publicity strategies designed to make her more glamorous. In an industry built on strict contracts and carefully managed images, this behavior was seen as dangerous. Studios preferred actors who followed instructions without protest. As a result, she gradually gained a reputation as difficult to work with. At the same time, her personal life became increasingly complicated. She married actor Leif Erikson, but the marriage was unstable and eventually ended in divorce. She also developed a close relationship with playwright Clifford Odets, whose political ideas and artistic ambitions influenced her thinking. Their relationship was intense, but ended painfully when Odets returned to his wife. The emotional strain from these experiences contributed to her growing frustration with Hollywood. She often felt that the industry valued appearance and obedience more than real talent. Drinking became more common in her life as she struggled with disappointment and anger. By the early 1940s, her career was beginning to decline. The major roles that once seemed certain became harder to obtain, and studios started offering her smaller parts. Her reputation for arguing on film sets made producers cautious about hiring her. Eventually, Paramount ended her contract, leaving her without the support of a major studio. The change was devastating for someone who had once been considered one of Hollywood's most promising actresses. The turning point in Frances Farmer's life came in 1942 and 1943 through a series of legal troubles that attracted national attention. Her drinking had increased, and she often felt overwhelmed by financial pressure and professional disappointment. One night, she was stopped by a police officer in Santa Monica because her car headlights were too bright during a wartime blackout. The officer suspected that she had been drinking, and the encounter led to her arrest. She was fined and placed on probation, but she struggled to follow the conditions set by the court. As her problems continued, newspapers reported every detail, turning her difficulties into public spectacle. The situation reached a dramatic moment in January 1943 when she appeared in court for violating probation. Witnesses described her as exhausted and emotionally unstable. During the hearing, she became angry and threw an inkwell toward the judge, splashing ink across the courtroom. The act shocked everyone present and became one of the most famous incidents in Hollywood history. She shouted that she wanted a lawyer and asked whether anyone in the courtroom had ever experienced a broken heart. The judge ordered that she serve time in jail, but shortly afterward, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. Doctors diagnosed her with serious mental illness and recommended institutional treatment. From there, she was moved between medical facilities before eventually being committed to Western State Hospital in Washington. At that time, mental hospitals were very different from modern psychiatric centers. Many were overcrowded and lacked enough trained staff to care for patients properly. Treatments often included insulin shock therapy, electroconvulsive therapy, and other methods designed to control behavior rather than address underlying causes of distress. For patients like Frances Farmer, the experience could be frightening and confusing. Inside Western State Hospital, the environment was harsh and chaotic. The institution housed far more patients than it had been designed to accommodate, creating crowded wards and constant tension. Nurses and attendants struggled to maintain order among hundreds of people with very different conditions. Reports from later investigations described understaffed units where exhausted workers attempted to supervise large groups of patients. According to accounts given by Frances Farmer after her release, life in the hospital felt more like imprisonment than medical care. She spoke about long periods spent in locked wards, restraints used on patients who resisted instructions, and treatments that left her weak and disoriented. Electroconvulsive therapy, commonly called electroshock, was used during that era without the anesthesia or muscle-relaxing drugs that are standard today. Patients experienced intense seizures during the procedure, and memory loss was a frequent side effect. Farmer later said that parts of her past seemed to vanish after these sessions. Stories about her treatment became increasingly dramatic over time. Some writers claimed that doctors had performed a lobotomy on her, a controversial surgical procedure that removed part of the brain to control behavior. However, hospital records later showed no evidence that she underwent such surgery. The rumor spread widely through books and films because it created a shocking image of Hollywood cruelty. Even without that claim, the reality of her years in institutions was disturbing enough. She spent long periods confined to the hospital and was released only temporarily before being returned again. During those years, the outside world moved on without her. New actors replaced the stars of the previous decade, and audiences gradually forgot the woman who had once been considered a rising talent. When she was finally released in 1950, she was only 36 years old, but felt much older because of everything she had endured. After leaving the hospital system, Frances Farmer faced the difficult challenge of rebuilding her life. Hollywood had already turned its attention to new performers, and the industry showed little interest in giving her another major opportunity. Instead, she focused on smaller theater productions and television work that allowed her to earn a modest living. Eventually, she moved to Indianapolis, where she began hosting a daily television movie program. The job was far removed from the glamorous film career she once imagined, but it provided stability and a connection with audiences. Viewers appreciated her intelligence and direct manner of speaking. During these later years, she also worked on an autobiography describing her experiences and reflecting on the choices that shaped her life. Writing the book required courage because it meant revisiting painful memories from the hospitals and the courtroom. As she worked on the manuscript, her health began to decline. In 1970, doctors diagnosed her with cancer of the esophagus. Despite the illness, she continued to write and dictate sections of the book, determined to finish telling her story. Frances Farmer died on August 1, 1970, at the age of 56. Her autobiography was published after her death and brought renewed attention to her life. Readers discovered a voice that was honest, thoughtful, and often critical of the systems that had controlled her. Over time, historians and journalists began re-examining the records connected to her hospitalizations and legal cases. These documents revealed a complicated story rather than a simple tragedy. They showed a talented woman who struggled with personal demons but also lived in a society that often punished independence, especially in women. Today, the story of Frances Farmer continues to inspire debate about mental health treatment, the power of the Hollywood studio system, and the ways public figures can be misunderstood or forgotten. Her life remains a reminder that fame does not always protect people from suffering, and that the truth behind famous stories is often far more complex than the myths that surround them. After the death of Frances Farmer in 1970, her story did not disappear. In fact, it slowly began to grow again, almost like a mystery that refused to stay buried. When her autobiography, Will There Really Be a Morning?, was published 2 years later, readers discovered a voice that sounded honest, reflective, and sometimes painfully direct. In the book, she described the years that had been hidden from the public during her time in psychiatric hospitals. She wrote about confusion, fear, and the feeling that she had lost control over her own life. The book did not try to make her appear perfect. Instead, it showed a complicated woman who admitted her mistakes while also describing the harsh treatment she believed she had endured. For many readers, the memoir was shocking because it challenged the official story that had been repeated for decades. The public had often been told that her problems were simply the result of alcoholism and emotional instability. Yet her own account suggested something deeper and more troubling. She described a hospital system where patients were often treated like prisoners rather than people in need of care. She spoke about long periods of silence, strict rules that discouraged speaking openly, and treatments that left her weak and confused. These descriptions caused some readers to question whether her institutionalization had been handled fairly. Others wondered if the pressures of Hollywood had played a larger role in her downfall than previously believed. During the 1970s, interest in her life grew rapidly. Television documentaries, newspaper articles, and biographies began exploring the strange path her career had taken. Many writers became fascinated by the contrast between her early promise and her sudden disappearance from the film industry. It seemed almost unbelievable that a performer who had once shared the screen with famous stars could vanish so completely from public life. Some researchers began examining old court records and hospital documents to better understand what had really happened. They discovered that the situation had been far more complicated than the rumors suggested. Farmer had indeed struggled with alcohol and emotional stress, but she had also lived during a time when mental health treatment was often crude and poorly understood. Hospitals were crowded, funding was limited, and doctors relied on methods that would later be considered controversial or even harmful. The combination of these factors created an environment where recovery was difficult and mistakes could easily be made. As the public learned more about the conditions inside institutions during the 1940s, sympathy for Farmer began to grow. People started to see her less as a scandalous actress and more as a victim of circumstances that were larger than any single person. During the following decade, the story of Frances Farmer entered popular culture in new ways. In 1982, a film titled Frances was released, starring actress Jessica Lange. The movie presented a dramatic version of Farmer's life, focusing on her struggles with Hollywood, her clashes with authority, and the years she spent inside mental hospitals. Lange's performance was powerful and emotional, earning widespread praise from critics and an Academy Award nomination. The film introduced Farmer's story to a new generation that had never heard her name before. However, the movie also added elements that blurred the line between fact and fiction. In order to create a dramatic narrative, the filmmakers included scenes that suggested she had undergone a lobotomy, a surgical procedure that damaged parts of the brain in order to control behavior. This image was shocking and unforgettable, but historians later explained that there is no clear evidence such an operation had ever taken place. Hospital records did not list her as a patient who received that surgery, and several doctors who worked at the institution said they had never seen documentation supporting the claim. Despite this, the idea of the lobotomy became one of the most widely repeated parts of the story. It demonstrated how powerful dramatic storytelling can be in shaping public memory. Around the same time, musicians and writers also became interested in the tragic actress. One of the most famous examples came in the early 1990s when the rock band Nirvana released a song titled Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle. The band's lead singer, Kurt Cobain, had read about her life and felt a strong connection to her struggle against authority and public misunderstanding. The song did not attempt to retell the entire history of her life, but it expressed a sense of anger and sympathy for the way she had been treated. By this time, Farmer had become more than just a forgotten actress. She had turned into a symbol of rebellion, a woman who refused to obey the strict expectations placed upon her by society and the entertainment industry. Writers continued to debate how much of the story should be blamed on her own behavior and how much should be blamed on the systems around her. Some believed she had been unfairly punished for refusing to conform. Others argued that her struggles with alcohol and emotional stress played a larger role than many fans were willing to admit. The truth probably lies somewhere between these positions. What is clear is that her life reflected the difficult realities faced by many people who lived in an era when mental illness was poorly understood and often feared. In the years since those debates began, historians have continued examining the records connected to Frances Farmer and the institutions where she was treated. These investigations have revealed valuable information about the conditions that existed in psychiatric hospitals during the 1940s and 1950s. Facilities like Western State Hospital were often designed to care for far fewer patients than they actually received. As populations increased, administrators struggled to provide enough beds, medical staff, and supplies. Reports from government inspections described crowded wards where patients slept close together and nurses worked long hours, with little support. Treatments such as insulin shock therapy and electroconvulsive therapy were considered advanced medical techniques at the time, but they were often used without the safety measures that later became standard. Doctors genuinely believed these treatments might help patients recover, yet the results were unpredictable and sometimes frightening. Many people who experienced these methods later described confusion, memory loss, and physical exhaustion.